Like and follow if you love horror. 3 days? The gray zone only appeared last night. He managed the stone-faced look well, as was typical of his station. But his light blue eyes and chubby baby cheeks always detracted from the presentation, regardless of his dark Latin skin, tall stature, and strong build. It's very possible the reaction took place over a few days, and this is the final product, I explained in the simplest terms. We might not have noticed earlier symptoms of the gray zone when the plants first started dying. He nodded. Very well, ma'am. I'll call the team up now. Don't tell them about the boot swabs in case they try to swap boots or have a backup pair, I asked. Affirmative, he said, then entered the red brick guard building to use the phone. Hey, did I hear someone scream? Casey called out from over at the far end of the field line. He carried with him a case of sample containers. That didn't beckon you sooner? I asked. Not my problem. Got a job to do out here, Casey said with a chuckle. Nice, asshole. And if it'd been related to the contamination? Reggie handed him the sample bag with the rat carcass. And what if it had? My question was rhetorical. Reggie muttered something unintelligible in response. We weren't an emergency response crew. We were biologists, chemists, and chemical engineers. Anything that constituted an emergency was the military's problem. Our emergency protocol was to stay out of the way. So, Casey broke through Reggie's muttering fit and jumped back on topic. About the edge of the gray zone. Nothing there either. Nothing recognizable anyways. And no little creepy crawlies for a good 300 yards outside of the gray zone. What's so universally toxic that it would drive off every living creature? Sylvia had her gears grinding, I could tell. You mean besides radioactivity? Casey was being sarcastic, but held out his rad reader, which registered safe. A supercooled gas like cryogenic ammonia, Reggie announced like he had a eureka moment. Some dumb grunt tries to steal it, or dispose of it, uses some shitty unpressurized steel drum. Drum starts leaking heavy, supercooled gases, and causes the trail out. The grunt realizes it isn't working, abandons the drum. Drum supercools, superoxidizes, ruptures, and basically disintegrates. The gas drives off the animals and creepy crawlies, then desiccates the plants. Basically super freezes them all, then the sun comes up and dries them out. A heavy supercooled gas can even account for the trails leading back, as it would behave like a liquid as it expanded. Doesn't explain the lack of malts, detritus, or droppings. Casey shook his head. If anything, they would be dehydrated from the rapid freezing and easy to find, I affirmed Casey's concerns. So it's a virus, Reggie retorted loudly. No food, all the little critters leave, all the detritus scavengers eat up what's left, run out of food, then they leave too. Nope, even when that does happen, at least one dead bug will turn up. Casey shook his head, dismissing another one of Reggie's ham-fisted explanations. This has chemical spill written all over it. Something caustic enough to literally eradicate all organic material. No detritus because it just disintegrated into dust. No malts or bugs because they dissolve the same way. Then anything large enough to escape just takes off into the night. Except a rat, Brainiac. Reggie gestured to the specimen he'd handed Casey only moments before. Unlike the rest of the area around the gray zone, which was lifeless for hundreds of feet, at the end of the trail to the guardhouse was the rat. Well, it was sheltered inside the guardhouse. Maybe it didn't observe there was a threat. No reason to flee. Casey explained. From his tone, I could tell even he knew that explanation was loose. This could even explain its aggressive behavior, Sylvia added. It likely lived there for years without attacking any of the guards. It has safety, shelter, even access to food, so it didn't flee. Instead, recent events agitated as perhaps it sensed danger. Alternatively, perhaps reduced exposure didn't kill it, but made it ill, and so it attacked. This is all pure speculation until we analyze the samples. Reggie was becoming cross, likely from getting brushed off by the rest of the team. He took deep pride in his overinflated sense of intellect. We didn't wait much longer. Only about 10 minutes later, and the rest of the West Guards began to assemble. Everyone who was assigned to the post over the past 3 days, all 3 shifts, all lined up at attention. Good morning, staff! Sergeant Nunez called out. "Good morning, Sergeant," the line barked back. "In a few moments, you are going to be asked to present your left foot, then your right foot, to the environmental chemistry team," he explained, and in proper fashion to ensure they understood it was an order. "You ought to do this without hesitation. You are to remain still for the full duration of the examination. You are then to state your name, rank, and shift to the chemist. You will do this also without hesitation. Once this is recorded, you are dismissed. Fall out and return to your duties. Do you understand?" "Yes, Sergeant," the line of troops responded. As good as his word, there was zero hesitation from any of the guards. The military might have been inefficient, but what they lacked for in efficiency, they made up for in discipline. Should any of the soldiers have been guilty of something, there was no way to tell. At the time, I mused that maybe they were too dumb to realize what we were testing for. That seemed unlikely, as the gray path of death was only a few yards away and quite visible. The men were tested, the swabs collected, then placed carefully into sample tubes. Then their name, rank, and shift were logged. Once an individual was logged, they departed with a simple "dismissed" and "yes, Sergeant." Before the last of the guards were dismissed, a commotion began to rise. Somewhere off on the base, before the last of the guards were dismissed, a commotion began to rise somewhere else on the base. It was hard to identify where, as the base was the size of a small city. The campus itself was a little over 2 square miles, not including the buffer zone surrounding the barbed wire fence. However, the sounds of gunfire were unmistakable. There was a sense of unease as we finished the swabs, and the last of the departing soldiers were handed a rifle when dismissed. Though, as I said, emergency responses were not exactly our wheelhouse. Regardless of what was happening, there was little we could do other than head back to the lab. Should an evacuation be called, that would be different. But until then, we were just expected to ignore it and go about our business. Not that the circumstances were common enough to have numbed us from the sound of gunfire. In fact, we were deeply rattled. No one could shake the uneasy feeling that gripped us all, and everywhere we went, all the other civilian contractors looked like their nerves were on edge. We headed quickly for decontamination, a small tent with a silly makeshift hamster tunnel into the lab. It was supposed to have been temporary until a proper one was built. However, at that point, it was already pushing 3 years old. It was mostly just dropped plastic and duct tape, but it did the job for the most part. We took turns cleaning, scrubbing, and moving on with our samples. Reggie was always the first to muscle his tubby body through decon. He pulled off his hood and mask, revealing his messy mat of short, thinning hair. He took a moment to clean the steam off his comically cliché nerdy glasses and wipe sweat from his patchy thin mustache. The next part was waiting for him to wrestle the rest of the suit off his tubby dad body. As a stark contrast, Casey was almost always next. His dark, tan, well-toned body was more typical of a surfer. This was complemented by his wavy, light brown shoulder-length hair. We often let Casey go next because we all knew it made Reggie feel insecure. Sylvia and I were the fastest at decon, so it made sense to let Reggie go first anyways. She'd slither her light brown body out of her gear in moments, pin up her dark brown hair, and be done with it. I had it down so well I swear I could pull a string and the hazmat suit would just fall off. Not that I'm some skinny mini, being shapelier than Sylvia. She looked like she was built for rugby. I looked more like your typical housewife. Not that I would mind playing a little black housewife to women like Sylvia, but dating subordinates was inappropriate. "A dark matter weapon," Casey blurted out as I exited decon last. "Don't be an idiot," Reggie replied with a shake of his head. "We're not a weapons testing facility. We're a propulsions testing facility." "That we know of." Casey looked around at us all. He knew none of us ever really knew what the military was doing on base. Sure, every one of us had our specific job for the military and had worked on more than one project entitled Top Secret, but we only got small glimpses of little sections. What would be the best material to cool off a propulsion system X? What are the most efficient ways to collect particle Y for samples?